The iron gates groaned as they swung open, their sound echoing like a warning inside the concrete jungle of Benton Federal Penitentiary. Rain tapped softly on the cold steel roof above, a steady rhythm like a ticking clock. Every inmate behind. Those walls paused, eyes narrowing, hands tightening, as something unusual unfolded along the main corridor. A K9 unit. Not a drug search, not a sweep. This was different. At the far end of the hall, a black and tan German shepherd stepped through. The entrance, his paws moving in slow, deliberate silence. There was something dignified in his posture, something that made even the roughest prisoners lower their gaze. Behind him walked a middle-aged man in civilian clothes, creased khakis, a tucked-in flannel shirt, and eyes too tired for his age. He didn't wear a badge anymore, but everything about him said cop. His name was Tom Granger, a retired police officer whose silence screamed of pain more than any man's words ever could. He'd walked this path before, but never like this. By his side, the dog Shadow moved like a ghost that had returned for something unfinished, old, graying at the muzzle, stiff in the joints. And yet, every motion was precise, as though he were on duty again. The guards knew better than to ask questions. They stood aside, eyes darting toward the solitary cell at the end of the row. Cell. By 17, that's where Nathan Reyes was kept. Inmate 37-6002, former street gang enforcer, convicted for armed robbery and suspected in 2 murders, though never proven. Solitary confinement for over a year. No visitors, no phone calls. Just letters he never answered and eyes that stared holes into the walls. As Tom and Shadow neared, whispers slithered from one cell to the next. What's the dog doing here? That's the old K9 from the city force, right? No way. You think they're bringing him in to ID someone? Tom didn't respond. His steps slowed as he reached B17. A narrow observation window revealed nothing but shadow. The inmate sat in darkness, hunched on his bunk like a statue eroded by time. The air was heavy, pressed down by something unseen. Tom gave a slow nod to the guard. The cell door unlatched with a hollow clank, the scent of metal and bleach mixed with something older, regret perhaps. Shadow didn't hesitate. He walked inside with the gravity of a soldier returning to a battlefield. His nails clicked softly against the floor. Nathan didn't move, didn't speak. His hands were pressed together as if in prayer or defiance. It was hard to tell which. Then, without warning, the dog did something no one expected. He sat. Right. In front of Nathan, close, eyes locked onto the man's face, and then he whined. A low, mournful sound that twisted the air like a knife in cloth. Nathan's eyes lifted, slow, sunken, empty. Shadow moved closer and placed his head gently onto the man's knee. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just waited, breathing in something more than scent, remembering. Tom stood frozen. His breath hitched. Nathan flinched. "Get him out of here," he muttered, voice coarse from disuse. But Shadow stayed, still, watching, feeling. Nathan shoved the dog weakly. "I said, get out." The shove was pathetic, feeble, as if his muscles had forgotten violence. Shadow didn't even flinch. Instead, he let out a short huff and gently placed a paw on Nathan's foot, pressing softly. Nathan stared at the dog's paw like it was a ghost touching him. Outside the cell, the corridor had fallen silent, so even the guards were still. Then Tom finally spoke, his voice a raspy tremor. "You remember him, don't you?" Nathan didn't reply. His jaw clenched. Tom's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You should. You saved his life once. And—" "He never forgot," Nathan scoffed, looking away, but his eyes betrayed him, moist, red, blinking too fast. "I didn't do it for him," he snapped. Tom stepped forward, voice steady now. "But you did do it. You stopped that kid with the gun, took the bullet, bought Shadow enough time to take the shooter down." Nathan let out a bitter chuckle, half laugh, half sob. "What did that get me, huh?" Tom looked at him, gaze heavy, with something unspoken. "A second chance, whether you used it or not, that's on you." The dog licked Nathan's hand once. It was that simple gesture that cracked something inside him. Nathan covered his face, and for the first time in years, the walls shook. Not from violence or rage, but from tears. Deep, raw sobs that had waited. Too long to come. Shadow leaned in, resting his body against the man's leg, his breathing calm. Like a guardian who had finally found the soul he had been looking for. Tom stepped back, his throat thick with emotion. He hadn't seen the inside of this prison in years. He never thought he'd return. But this had been Shadow's request. The dog had grown restless in recent weeks, waking up at night, pacing the halls, sniffing at the closet where his old badge and leash were stored. He didn't want toys. He didn't want treats. He wanted this. Shadow had unfinished business, and now, somehow, unbelievably, Nathan Reyes, convicted felon, solitary ghost, was weeping into the fur of the dog he once saved. Even the guards couldn't pretend anymore. One turned away, blinking hard. Another lowered his head. Tom let them have their moment. No more words were needed. Shadow had done what no counselor, no prison chaplain, and no courtroom had been able to do. He'd reached what was left of Nathan Reyes's heart, and somehow, in this unlikely broken place, he had begun to put it back together, 15 years earlier. The alley was tight, the night air thick with tension. Gunfire had just ceased, but the city still trembled with the echo of it. A SWAT van idled outside a warehouse off Camden Street, its blue lights flickering against the brick walls. Officers moved like shadows, silent, methodical, alert, and, among them, lower to the ground but twice as focused, was Shadow. Younger then. Sleek, sharp-eyed, and built for precision. He was the best they had. At his side, Officer Tom Granger checked his weapon, nerves coiled tight in his gut. It was his 4th year on the K9 unit, and Shadow had only been with him for 8 months. But in those 8 months, the bond they'd forged had become something more than tactical. It was spiritual. Tom had trained dogs before. Shadow trained him. Warehouse entry in 2, came the command over the comm. Tom crouched beside Shadow. "Stay tight," he whispered, "just like we trained." The shepherd gave a low, affirmative rumble. They breached. The warehouse exploded, with motion. Suspects scattered. One ran toward the back exit, exactly where Shadow had been trained to intercept. With a silent command, Tom released him. Shadow flew like a missile, cutting through darkness, claws hammering concrete. Tom followed, until he heard the shot. It wasn't aimed at him. It wasn't aimed at any officer. It was aimed at a teenager. Tom turned sharply and saw it happen in the blink of a heartbeat. A young gang member, no more than 17, was sprinting out with a Glock aimed at a rival, bleeding against a stack of pallets. Tom couldn't get there in time, but someone else did. From the shadows came a figure, Nathan Reyes. Back then, just a street kid trying to prove loyalty to a crew that never loved him. But at that moment, something changed. He jumped in front of the shooter, knocking the gun sideways. It fired but hit the wall. The shooter turned the gun on Nathan and pulled the trigger again. The bullet hit him square in the shoulder. That's when Shadow came in. Fur flying, jaws flashing white, he lunged, took the shooter down before the gun could cycle again. Officers swarmed the area. The scene ended in seconds, but the impact would last a lifetime. Tom had dragged Shadow off, eyes wide, heart pounding. "You good?" he asked the shepherd, checking for blood. Nothing. Then he turned to the bleeding man on the ground. "Nathan. He saved the kid," one officer muttered, stunned. "He took a bullet for him," said another. Tom crouched beside Nathan. The young man was fading fast, eyes blinking against the blood trickling into them. "Why'd you do it?" Tom asked quietly. Nathan tried to answer, but passed out. Later at the hospital, the doctors called it a miracle. The bullet had missed vital organs. Tom visited once, out of curiosity more than duty. Nathan refused to speak to him, just stared blankly out the window. "You saved my partner," Tom said anyway. "Whether you meant to or not, you did." The only response he got was silence. Years passed. Shadow kept working, tirelessly, fiercely. Together, he and Tom cracked drug rings, found missing kids, even pulled bodies from rubble after a gas explosion. He was relentless in duty, gentle with children, and intimidating to anyone who meant harm. But something always lingered in the background. That moment in the warehouse. That kid. Nathan. Tom saw his name again 3 years later in an arrest record. Aggravated assault, illegal weapons possession. Then again, robbery, resisting arrest. Then again, until finally the charges stuck. Life inside. Tom had tried once, just once, to send a letter, to say something. Nathan never replied, but Shadow, he remembered. Sometimes during the rare, quiet moments, Tom would catch Shadow pacing by the old evidence locker, where Nathan's file still sat, stored and long forgotten. He'd sniff at the door, tilt his head, ears twitching like he heard echoes only he could decipher. "Let it go," Tom would whisper. He made his choices, but Shadow never truly did. And then came the diagnosis. Age had caught up with him. Degenerative myelopathy. His legs would go first, then the rest. Tom retired Shadow immediately. No more calls, no more chases, just rest. But rest didn't sit well with the dog. He grew restless. He'd wake in the night and paw at the front door. He refused to play, to eat, to sleep for long. He was searching for something, and one night Tom realized what it was. He was waiting to close a chapter. Tom found the file again, blew dust off the cover. Inmate 37-6002, Nathan Reyes. He stared at the photo. Shadow curled at his feet and let out a low sigh. "Like a man thinking of old debts. You really want to see him again, don't you?" Tom whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once. Tom made the call. It wasn't easy. The request was unprecedented. The prison warden was skeptical. "A K-9 unit wants to visit an inmate he once encountered?" He practically laughed, but Tom didn't argue. He sent over the full case file, the newspaper clipping of the warehouse incident, the old photo of Nathan being carried out on a stretcher while Shadow stood guard beside him. The call came a week later. Approved. "One-time visit, limited contact, you've got 20 minutes. And now here they were, inside the walls of Benton Penitentiary, Shadow sitting in front of the man who once took a bullet that might have killed him. 15 years of silence between them. But time didn't mean anything to Shadow. He remembered Nathan's scent, the tremor in his hands, the blood on his hoodie, the quiet pain in his eyes. And Nathan, slowly, was remembering too. As his fingers curled into the dog's fur, he whispered, "I didn't do it for you." But the tears said otherwise. Warden. Collins stood in the observation hallway, arms crossed over his chest, eyes narrowed behind steel-framed glasses. From his vantage point, he could see everything through the reinforced window. The prison visitation chamber was usually reserved for lawyers and tearful families, not dogs. This was unprecedented. "You're telling me the damn dog asked to see him?" he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Inside the room, time had slowed to a crawl. Nathan Reyes knelt in front of Shadow, hands trembling as they rested on the old German shepherd's chest. The fur was coarse now, speckled with grey. His breathing was slower, more deliberate. His legs slightly bowed from age, but his eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, hadn't changed. They still saw things most men ignored. "I haven't seen anything good in over a decade," Nathan whispered, voice cracking as though it hadn't been used in years. "You remember that day, don't you?" Shadow didn't move, just blinked, slowly, resting his head on Nathan's lap. "I didn't know what I was doing back then," he said. "I didn't even like that kid I saved, but you jumped in like I mattered." A long silence stretched, then a voice cut through it sharply from the corner of the room. "That's enough. Time's up." The guard's tone was dry, rehearsed, like he was reading off a grocery list. Tom rose slowly from the bench where he'd been sitting. "He just needs a few more minutes." The guard shrugged. "Not my call." But the warden's voice suddenly came through the intercom. "Let them be. 5 more." The guard looked confused but backed off. Tom sat back down quietly. Nathan glanced up at him. "Why'd you bring him after all these years?" Tom didn't answer right away. He watched Shadow, who hadn't moved from Nathan's lap. "Because I think he's been holding on just to see you. Some dogs don't forget, especially not ones like him." Nathan looked down, shame spilling into every line on his face. "I've been in here so long I forgot what real forgiveness looks like." Shadow stirred just slightly and let out a low, muffled bark. Not aggressive, not alert, just speaking. Tom's voice softened. "He forgave you the moment you stepped in front of that gun. I think he's been waiting for you to forgive yourself." Nathan wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I can't," he whispered. "Not for what I did after that." Tom looked at him. "Then tell me." Nathan drew in a long breath. "After I got out of the hospital, I went right back to the streets. Didn't matter that I'd saved someone, no one cared, I didn't either. Started carrying again, started hitting spots. Until I got caught with a piece in my glove compartment and 2 stolen IDs in the trunk. My public defender didn't fight it. He said I was a lost cause." Tom leaned forward. "And you believed him?" "Didn't have a reason not to. Maybe now you do." Before Nathan could respond, the chamber door swung open again. The guard stood tall. "Sorry, no more extensions. Let's go." Nathan stood reluctantly, moving slow, like his legs didn't want to carry him away. He gave Shadow one last stroke along the neck. "You always had better judgment than most men I knew," he murmured, "even the cops." But as he turned to leave, Shadow rose. Slowly, shakily, but deliberately. He followed. The guard stepped forward. "No, no, the dog stays," Shadow barked, one sharp, commanding bark that echoed off the concrete walls. Nathan froze. Tom stood up. "He doesn't want to say goodbye. Like this." The guard, now annoyed, reached for his radio. "Warden, we got a problem. The dogs, let them walk together." The warden interrupted from the intercom. "What?" "Just let them walk." Nathan turned around, eyes wide. He bent down, opened his hand. "You want to walk with me?" Shadow wagged his tail weakly and stepped forward, and so the prisoner and the dog walked side by side down the corridor. Slowly. One man broken but waking up. One dog tired, but still loyal to the last beat of his heart. Officers lined the walls, silent, watching. One whispered, "That's the Reyes kid, thought he was a lifer." Another nodded, "He is. But that dog don't care about your record." But then came the problem. At the final checkpoint, the door that led back to general population, a new voice entered the scene. Deputy Warden Hughes, hard-faced, rule stickler, clipboard in hand. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply. "Why is that inmate walking freely with a K9? Tom answered calmly. "Warden gave permission," Hughes sneered. "This is not a therapy walk. This is a correctional facility." He turned to Nathan. "Get back to your cell." Shadow let out a low growl, barely audible but deep. Tom stepped in. "We're leaving, don't make this ugly." "I don't care who that dog is or what you think this is," Hughes snapped. "He doesn't belong here, and neither do second chances." Nathan looked at him, and for the first time in over a decade, he stood tall. "Maybe not, but I think this dog just reminded me that I still belong to something." Hughes opened his mouth to object, but Shadow stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. He walked right up to Hughes and sat. His eyes never left the deputy warden's face, a silent defiance. Hughes took a step back. "Get him out of here, but—" Shadow didn't move. He just waited, like he was sensing something, but something deeper. Tom's voice broke through the standoff. "Shadow! Let's go, boy! Let's go, boy!" The shepherd gave Hughes one last look, long, piercing, and then turned to follow Tom and Nathan back toward the main entrance. As the heavy doors clanged shut behind them, the guard at the final post whispered under his breath, "That was more than just a visit." And he was right, because something had changed, not just in Nathan, but in everyone who watched that old dog walk down the corridor like he owned the truth and wouldn't leave without delivering it. 2 days later, the prison chapel was prepared. For a service no one expected, Shadow had passed in his sleep, curled up on a blanket beside Tom's boots. No pain, no whimper. Just a silent departure from a world he had served more loyally than many men ever could. Tom had petitioned for Shadow to be cremated with honors. The department agreed, but what shocked everyone was the next request. He wanted Shadow's ashes, brought back to the prison, to Nathan Reyes. Permission had been granted, grudgingly, with limitations, The event would be brief, no civilians, officers present, and Shadow's urn would be under supervision. It was a cold morning, wind hissing across the concrete walls of the yard like a whisper of forgotten souls. Inside the chapel, a folded flag rested on the altar beside the urn, which bore a brass plate Shadow K9 Unit Faithful. Until the end, the pews were sparsely filled. A few officers, Warden Collins, 2 chaplains, and Nathan, shackled at the wrists and ankles, seated in the front row under armed supervision. The silence was thick, heavy. Tom stood behind the podium, holding a worn photograph of Shadow in his prime. Vest on, eyes fierce, ears alert. He wasn't just a K9, Tom began, his voice low and steady. He was a partner, a guardian. He saved lives, and he loved without conditions. He stood beside me through fire, bullets, and betrayal. But his final act wasn't just bravery. It was mercy. Nathan stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight, but his eyes wet. Tom set the photo down. He wanted to see him. He motioned toward Nathan, before he passed. And somehow I think he knew that his last mission wasn't to save a life. It was to redeem one. A murmured amen echoed from the back. Then Tom walked forward, carrying the urn in his hands. Every eye followed him as he stepped down from the altar, past the pews, and slowly approached the shackled inmate sitting motionless. "Nate," he said gently. Nathan looked up. The room vanished. There was only the urn and the weight of a soul too heavy to forget. "I'm not supposed to do this," Tom whispered, kneeling, "but he would have wanted you to hold him." He placed the urn in Nathan's hands. At first, Nathan didn't move, just stared. His fingers trembled, clasped around the smooth metal. Then slowly he bowed his head, resting his forehead against it like a man who'd just touched something holy. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice shaking. "I should have stayed on the path." A sniffle escaped from a young officer in the back row. No one looked at him. Nathan pulled the urn closer to his chest, rocking slightly. The guards tensed but didn't move. Then it happened. A sound no one expected in a place so bleak. A bark, clear, sharp, echoing. Everyone turned. But the chapel was empty, save for the people present. A second bark followed. Tom's eyes darted around. "What the—" The chapel doors slammed open. At first no one saw what had entered, but then the silence shifted, as if the air itself had taken a breath. A golden retriever in a service harness stood at the threshold, ears perked, staring into the room. Behind her, a young girl appeared, barefoot in a wrinkled blue dress. Her eyes were glassy, cheeks pale. She walked forward slowly, hand resting gently on the dog's back. Warden Collins rose instantly. "Who let them in? What is this?" Tom rushed forward. "Wait, hold on!" The girl walked toward Nathan, the dog trotting beside her like a sentinel. "Who are you?" Tom asked gently, kneeling down. The girl stopped in front of Nathan, staring at him. Then her lips parted. "You're the man who saved me," she said. The room fell into stunned silence. Nathan looked up, stunned. "What?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old laminated newspaper clipping. Tom took it gently. His eyes widened. It was a local report, years old. Headline: "Teen gunman foiled by stranger with courage and a K9 hero." The image beneath it, grainy, black and white, showed a much younger Nathan bleeding from his arm, kneeling beside a weeping child being held by a German shepherd. The girl pointed to the dog in the picture. "That was him, wasn't it?" Nathan nodded slowly. "I was the kid in the pink coat," she whispered. Emotion tore through Nathan's face like lightning. "I never knew if you were okay." "I was," she said, "because of you." The dog beside her barked once, firm, proud. The chapel watched in frozen reverence. Tom looked at the urn in Nathan's hands, and something clicked. "He brought her here," he said, barely above a whisper. "He didn't just come to say goodbye, he came to finish what he started." Warden Collins, for the first time in his career, didn't speak. His mouth hung open slightly as the young girl stepped closer and placed her small hand over the urn in Nathan's arms. "I don't know what happened after that day," she said. "But I know this. He loved you. And if he did, then you must still be good. The service dog barked again, softly this time, before sitting beside Shadow's urn. And in that moment, prison walls didn't matter. Records didn't matter. The past didn't define anything. The truth stood in flesh and fur in a chapel soaked with silence, and hearts forever changed. Nathan broke down, not in shame, but in freedom. He sobbed into his hands, the urn pressed to his chest, as the little girl leaned forward and hugged him. Tom turned to the officers. "Someone better start rewriting this man's file." No one argued, because when a dog walks into prison to deliver a man's last hope and brings a living miracle with him, you don't question it, you just believe. The silence of the prison chapel lingered like incense, a holy stillness, fragile, sacred. The little girl remained at Nathan's side, her arm gently resting across his hunched shoulders. The service dog curled beside them, head on its paws, eyes half closed in peaceful watchfulness. No one moved until Tom, almost hesitantly, approached Warden Collins with the clipping still trembling in his hand. "Sir, this changes everything." The warden exhaled sharply, then gave a slow nod. "Bring him back to the interview room." Nathan was escorted out, carefully this time. No tugging of chains, no shouting. He walked with the urn still in his arms, the girl and her dog trailing just behind like a quiet procession of fate. Inside the sterile light of the interview room, the atmosphere was far from clinical. It was electric, bursting with something deeper than adrenaline, truth clawing its way to the surface. Tom, the warden, and two internal affairs officers sat across from Nathan. The girl was seated nearby, her dog at her feet. Tom placed a thick file on the table. Photos, case documents. "Confession transcripts, your conviction," he said gently. "There were things that never added up. Your lawyer gave up. You didn't." Nathan didn't speak. "Now," Tom continued, "we have something new. Something that might just change everything." He turned to the little girl. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Her voice was soft but clear. "Eleanor." "Eleanor," he said kindly. "Do you remember the day that man saved you?" She nodded. "I remember everything." Tom exchanged a glance with the warden. "Would you be willing to talk to us about it? About what you saw that day?" Elena looked at Nathan. "If he's okay with it." Nathan blinked slowly. "I want them to know, all of it." The interview began. The details poured out like a dam breaking. It turned out Elena had remembered much more than anyone thought possible. She described the convenience store, the gunman, the sound of barking, her mother screaming, Nathan bursting in, off duty, unarmed, charging straight at the shooter with Shadow at his side. "He pushed me behind a display shelf," she said. "Then Shadow jumped between me and the bad man." Her hands trembled as she continued. "The bad man shot twice, but Shadow never moved." Tears filled her eyes. "That man," she looked at Nathan, "he didn't shoot. He was hit. But he still got the gun away from the other man. He didn't hurt him, he just stopped him." Tom leaned forward. "You're saying Nathan disarmed the shooter but never fired his weapon?" She nodded. "He never even had one." One of the officers narrowed his eyes. "But that's not what the report says. The store owner claimed Nathan came in shooting." Tom slid a photo across the table. "That store owner? Turns out he was related to the shooter, his cousin." "What?" the warden snapped. "Covered." Up the story. Claimed self-defense on his cousin's part. But we pulled surveillance video, was buried in archives during the investigation. No one looked at it because it had been misfiled under a different case number. He clicked a remote. On the screen, grainy footage lit up. There was Nathan bursting into the store. Shadow beside him, no gun in his hand. Just instinct and speed, the struggle, the chaos, and unmistakably, 2 shots from the shooter, none from Nathan. Then the takedown. A disarmed gunman, Nathan bleeding, holding the girl behind him. Silence filled the room like thunder. Warden Collins's face turned pale. "Dear God." Tom's voice was a whisper. He never even got the chance to defend himself. The warden looked at Nathan with something close to shame. "You were sentenced to 25 years for protecting a child." Nathan closed his eyes. I stopped fighting after the first appeal. I thought maybe I deserved it. Maybe it was. Karma. Tom placed a hand on the table. You don't deserve this. Then Elena reached into her small backpack and pulled out something strange. A dog collar. Weathered. Faded. The nameplate barely legible. Shadow. I kept it, she said, handing it to Nathan. After the attack, your dog stayed with me while you were in the hospital. I never let go of it. Nathan's hands shook as he took the collar. I thought he died years ago, he murmured. They said he was reassigned. Tom cleared his throat. He was, but he refused to bond with any new handler. He kept trying to return to the precinct or to the courthouse. Eventually they retired him. He lived with me for the past few years. He paused. Until he found a way back to you. Emotion. Cracked Nathan's face. He remembered, he whispered. All this time, Tom nodded. And maybe he knew this was the only way your truth would ever come out. The warden stood. I'll speak to the parole board immediately. We'll open a full review of the case. If what we've seen is what it looks like, it is. Tom interrupted. Then this man has spent 10 years in here for something he didn't do. Elena walked over and took Nathan's hand. You saved me. Now I can help save you. For the first time in a decade, Nathan didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt seen. He felt believed. And it was because of a dog who refused to let his partner be forgotten. 3 weeks later, the prison gates opened to the quiet crunch of gravel and the burnished orange light of dawn. Nathan stood at the threshold, dressed in donated civilian clothes and clutching only a small canvas duffel. His posture was stiff from years of concrete beds and iron bars, but his eyes were wide open. For the first time in a decade, unchained. No one cheered. There were no reporters, no camera crews, only the sound of mourning birds and the heartbeat. He hadn't felt since the day he was dragged away in chains. Shadow's collar was in his hand. Worn, battered, engraved with memory. Waiting just past the gate was Tom, leaning against an old truck, eyes glassy, and beside him stood Elena. She was taller now, or maybe it was just the light that made her look stronger. She wore a denim jacket that dwarfed her shoulders and carried a leash that led down to a familiar figure, a German shepherd. Quiet, grey around the muzzle. His ears twitched first, then his nose lifted, then his whole body stilled. Nathan dropped the bag and stepped forward. Wordless, the dog gave a low, trembling whine. Then he lunged forward, not violently, but desperately. Old legs, old heart, old strength, but all of it surged forward like a dam breaking, straight into Nathan's arms. Nathan knelt, his hands cradling the dog's face, his forehead pressed to Shadow's. Hey, buddy. The words cracked like dry earth. You waited for me. Shadow didn't bark, didn't jump. He just leaned against Nathan's chest, as if he'd finally returned home. Tom lowered his eyes. He's got maybe a month, maybe less. His legs are weak, his heart too. Nathan nodded, still holding Shadow's face. Then we make it count. Elena joined them, slipping her hand into Nathan's. I want to come visit, she said. You... Better, he said softly. Tom handed him a file. They're expunging your record. Full pardon coming through in the next few days. You'll be a free man, Nathan. Nathan looked up, not at the paper, but at the sky. Free. Not just from bars, but from doubt, from shame, from silence. He stood slowly, one hand on Shadow's back, and looked out beyond the parking lot, beyond the fences, into the open road that disappeared into the sunrise. Where to? Tom asked. Nathan smiled faintly. Anywhere with grass. Tom chuckled. There's a field behind my cabin. Shadow loved it. Shadow's ears perked slightly at the word field. Nathan looked down at his dog. What do you say, boy? Shadow wagged his tail once, slow, deliberate, the kind of tail wag that said, I've been waiting for this. They climbed into the truck. Elena nestled between them. Shadow laid his head across both their laps as the engine rumbled to life. As they drove, Tom turned on the radio. It played something soft, an old country song that spoke of redemption and open roads. No one talked much. There wasn't a need. Sometimes the soul speaks, in silence. Sometimes the loudest sound is a heart beating for the first time in years. Nathan looked out the window as trees blurred past. He saw families walking, a boy with a dog, an old man holding a coffee cup. All the ordinary things he once thought he'd never see again. Shadow stirred and licked his hand. "You brought me back," Nathan whispered. Shadow blinked slowly. They arrived just as the sun crested the tree line. Tom's cabin was modest, wooden siding, an old barn nearby, and a sweeping meadow lined with tall grass and wildflowers dancing in the wind. Nathan opened the truck door and stepped onto the soft earth. He helped Shadow down gently. For a moment they stood at the edge of the field, and then, without leash or command, Shadow walked forward, slow but purposeful. He reached the tall grass and laid down with a long, contented sigh. Nathan walked out beside him and sat down. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Elena came and curled up next to them, her small head resting against Nathan's shoulder, Shadow's flank warm against her legs. Tom stood at the porch, watching them like a proud father watching his broken family begin to heal. For the first time in years, Nathan closed his eyes and didn't feel afraid. There would still be nightmares, there would still be scars, but now there was a field, a girl, a dog, and freedom. The sun slipped lower, casting golden veins across the field where man, girl, and dog sat bathed in the quiet of everything they had lost, and somehow everything they'd found again. That evening, as the sky turned lavender, Nathan took out the old collar and placed it gently beside Shadow's head. The dog's breathing had slowed, but his eyes still followed Nathan, never straying, never doubting. "You did your job, partner," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "You saved me, even when I stopped trying to be saved." Shadow blinked. Once, a slow tail wag tapped the grass, and then, as if waiting for just that moment, his final duty done, he let out a soft breath and went still beneath the drifting clouds. Elena covered her mouth and leaned into Nathan, tears spilling freely. But Nathan didn't cry, not right away. He only pressed his forehead to Shadow's and whispered the words he'd carried for a decade. "Good boy." Tom stood quietly behind them, head bowed. Later, Nathan and Elena dug a small grave at the edge of the field, beneath an old oak tree. No speeches, no gravestone, just a simple wooden cross and the collar nailed to it. That night Nathan couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, eyes lost in the stars. Elena came out quietly, wrapped in a blanket, and leaned against him. "Do you think he knew?" she asked. Nathan nodded, eyes glistening. "He always knew, long before any of us did." She looked up. "Canines don't forget, do they?" "No," Nathan whispered. "Some souls never stop protecting the ones they love." And for the first time in 10 years he felt whole. Not because he was free, but because someone had fought to remember him. A little girl, a loyal dog, and the kind of truth that no prison walls could hold forever. As the wind rustled through the oak leaves above Shadow's grave, Nathan knew. Some partnerships go beyond life, some justice takes a decade, and sometimes a dog is the only one who can carry the truth all the way home. All the way home.